All right, so today we'll discuss one of the important topic, so which is functions. So first of all, we need to understand what is function. And in TypeScript, there are many ways to create a functions, and we'll see what are those ways. Like we have a different type of functions, like we have a named functions, we have a anonymous functions, and we have a lambda functions or arrow functions. So different kinds of functions supported in TypeScript. Okay. So first of all, what is function? Anybody have any idea? So what is function? Simple, one single sentence definition. What is function? In any programming language, the same concept is already there. So just you can tell what is function basically. What is a use of function? So function is basically a block of code, okay, which we can reuse. A function is a block of code which we can reuse. But how we can reuse the function? Just we need to call the function whenever we need. Okay, for example, let's say I have written a function and which will perform the addition of two numbers. So whenever I call the function, which will add two numbers, and those two numbers we can pass to the function, right? So the function is what? A function is a block of statements which will perform certain task. But how the function will do the task? We have to call the function. We have to call the function. The function itself cannot do anything. We have to call the function and then function will be invoked. Okay, so let's say some xyz. I have created some function like this. I have written some piece of code. And why we need to create the function first of all? Because reusability. So we can achieve the reusability. So same set of statements or same kind of operation if you want to do multiple times in your programming. So we no need to write the same code again and again multiple times. Simply create one single function and just we need to call the function like this. And this will invoke the function and execute the code. Okay, sometimes the function needs some parameters. Let's say I want to add two numbers. So those two numbers we need to pass from the function call. So it will take those two parameters and it will perform the addition of two numbers. Sometimes function can return the value also. Suppose I can write the function just printing the addition of two numbers. After calculating addition of two numbers, I just print the output here itself. In that case, it doesn't return anything. But sometimes I want to get the data or return the output. So the function can also return the output. So there are multiple ways we can create a function. So the function is basically what is a block of statements or block of code, which will invoke at the time of calling. So we can just invoke the function by just calling the name of the function. Okay, in TypeScript, it is very easy to do that. And we have different ways to create a functions and different types of functions are supported in TypeScript. Okay, so let us see how we can create a functions and how we can work with the different type of functions. So mainly there are three types of functions supported. One is called named functions. Second is called anonymous function, which is also called nameless function. And the third is called arrow function or lambda functions. These are the three kinds of functions are provided. So we'll discuss one by one. So first let's go to our project and create new folder for today. Say day 7. And inside the day 7, so let's go and create a new file. Say named functions. First, let us start with the named functions. So named functions dot ts. Okay. So first of all, what is a named function and what is the syntax? If I look at this named function, it is a function that is declared with the name, obviously. So the named function means the name itself is clearly saying the function should have some name. And we can also create a function without giving any name, which is called as a anonymous function or nameless function. That is another category or another type. But here the named function is nothing but what? We can create a function by giving some name. Okay, we have to give some name to the function, and at the time of calling the function also we use the same name. That's called named function. So what is the syntax here? We use something called keyword function, and this is a name. Here we need to provide the function name and parameters, single or multiple parameters. Even sometimes if we don't pass any parameters, we can still create a function. And return type also we need to specify. And if the function doesn't return any type, we can simply say void. Even we don't specify void, no problem. That is an optional, because it will follow the type inference concept at the beginning. If I don't specify any data type, based on the type inference, it will automatically decide what type of data it is returning. And this is a block. We can put the braces here or here. So here we need to write the block of code. So this is syntax of named function. So we start with the function keyword, name of the function, parameters, return type, colon, return type, and block of the code. Okay. So parameters are optional. If the function is based on requirement, if you want to pass some parameters, you can pass it, or else we no need to pass parameters. And return type, suppose if function is returning some number, here we need to specify the return type as a number. If the function is returning a string, then here we specify as a string. So it depends on the type of return type, we specify the data type here. If function is not returning anything, simply say void. Okay. So this is the syntax of named function. I'll show you many examples. Easily you can understand. So first, named function is nothing but what? A function which doesn't have a name. Sorry, which does have a name. With a name, we need to declare a function. By specifying the name, we declare the function, so which is called as a named function. So guys, is my voice clear to everyone? Please, can you please confirm in the chat box? Okay, perfect. All right, so now we'll see some examples of a named function. Okay, this is a declaration. So we have declared the function, we have implemented, but how to call the function? To invoke this particular function, we need to simply say, we need to invoke with the function name. You can say function name and then bracket, that's it. So this is how we need to invoke the function, or calling the function, or invoking the function. Okay, so this is called declaring the function or implementing the function, and this is called declaring, or so calling the function or invoking the function. So let's see how we can create the functions, and we'll see different examples and different types. Named function. So let's go with example 1. Named function. So named function may pass parameters, may not pass parameters according to our requirement. So in the first example, I'll show you the named function with no parameters, no return type. There are no parameters, there are no return type. No parameters, no return type. Simply I create a simple function. Observe this. So how to start? We need to create it with a function keyword. Function, and the name of the method is simply say a display bracket, and this function is not returning any value. So simply what you can do, colon void, and after that simply start braces, and here we need to write some piece of code. Since this function is not returning any value, simply what I can say, I say console.log off. I print simple message. Let's say welcome to TypeScript, like this. So this is a simple function which doesn't return any value, doesn't need any parameters. So no parameters means empty bracket, no return value means a void. But what this function will do, when I call this function, it will just print a simple message called welcome to TypeScript. So it is a named function with no parameters, no return value. Okay, now let us invoke the function. So to invoke the function, simply call display. That's it. So when I execute this code, let me execute tsx day 7 / named functions.ts. Yeah, now we can see we got an output like this. So if I don't call this function, it won't invoke itself. Okay, we need to call the function. So if I just commented this call, simply if I execute once again, you won't get any output. So we must call the function. Calling function. Okay, this is a simple example how we can create a named function. So function name is like a method name. Yes. So in Java, we have only methods actually. We do not have a functions concept. And anybody know what is the difference between function and method? So how we will create a function? Exact similar way we will create a method also, but there is a difference actually. Right. So functions we can create without using objects or class. So methods come into picture when you discuss about object-oriented programming. Okay, if I create the same function inside the class, we call it as a method. Okay, and those methods we can access only through objects. But here we haven't created any class, we haven't created any objects. Simply we created a function. So that is the difference between function and method. Definition is same. Okay, function is a group of statements or a block of statements which will be executed whenever you call the function. Same definition is applicable for method also, but the methods, if I create a same function within the class, which is called as a method. Okay, so we'll discuss that later. So this is a simple a function, which is also called as a subroutine. In another programming languages, we call it as a subroutine or function. Okay, so we declare a simple named function because it is also having the name. So what is the name of this function? Simply display. This is the name of the function. And we invoke the function just by calling the function. Okay. Now, let me show you another example. So we'll see different combinations, how we can create a named functions. Another function. So this time I'll show you named function with parameters and return value. Named function with the parameters we need to pass, and also it will return the value. So I'll create a simple function. Now function, keyword is function, and the name of the function is, I'm just giving add numbers. And this function should take two parameters. I'll pass two parameters. So what are they? One is x, which is a number type, comma. Second is y, which is also a number type. So this is how we need to specify the parameters. So you can pass n number of parameters. Here I'm taking only two parameters. And colon, what is the return type of this? After adding the number, what could be the return type? After adding these two numbers, return type is also a number. Obviously, you will get a number. So return type is a number. And now inside this, we need to add these two values, x and y. We will get it here, right? So simply you can say x plus y. And what we need to do with this result? We need to simply return the result. So specify the return statement. And these brackets are optional. This is how we can create a named function with parameters and return type. So here you can specify n number of parameters by separating comma. And this is the return type and return x plus y. So how we can invoke the function now? So to invoke the function, again, same thing we need to do. So add numbers. And this time we need to pass parameters. So how many parameters it is accepting? Two parameters. Both are numbers. So here I'm passing two parameters. Let's say 2, 3. Is this enough? Will it print output? No, it won't print any output. It will invoke the function, but in the function, we are not printing the output actually. We are just returning the output. So whatever output it is returned by this function, we can print that output directly by keeping this. You can use some other variable. You can store that result in another variable, or you can directly print like this console.log. You can put this function call inside the console.log. This is the direct way. Okay, and if you don't want to do like this directly, you can simply say add numbers and pass the data, and again create another variable. So let result, which is also number, equal to. So like this, you need to define another variable to store the return output, and then you need to print this result in the console window. I say console.log of result. So this is the way. So instead of writing two statements, we can simply include in one single statement. So we can simply avoid to create this variable. Okay. So this is how we can simply call the function by passing parameters and get the result into another variable, and we can just print this. Okay. So let's execute one more time. We can get 5 as an output. Okay. So this is how we can use named function with parameters and return value. So this will also will do the same thing. If I just call the function by passing parameters and it is returning the value. That value, the returned value will be printed by console.log. So this will also do the same thing. We just try to avoid the additional variable, simply printed 5 as an output. Okay. So this is a named function with parameters and return value. Now, let us see the another example. I'm commenting this at the time of practicing. You can just uncomment and do practice. Now, the third thing, named function with rest parameters. What is the meaning of rest parameters? So we already know what is parameter. So these are the parameters we are passing into the function. Then what is the meaning of rest parameters? Rest parameters. So in another programming, even Java is also, we have this concept, but we haven't used this terminology actually. So rest parameters means, if I look at the previous example in the previous function, how many parameters we are passing? 2 parameters we are passing. So this function is accepting only 2 parameters, so that we should also pass only 2 parameters at the time of calling the function. Can we pass 3 parameters here? Can we pass 3 parameters? What will happen when you pass 3 parameters? Let me check. Suppose here this is return 2 plus 3 equal to 5. Okay, perfectly fine. So for example, I pass another. So 2 comma 3 comma 4, or I can say 1 comma 2 comma 3. 3 parameters I'm passing. See, the TypeScript is giving an error. Why? Because the function is accepted only 2 arguments. Arguments or parameters is exactly same. Don't confuse. Okay. At the time of passing the data, we call them as an parameters. At the time of receiving, we call them as arguments. Okay. So when I pass only 2 parameters and define the 2 parameters matching, but when you pass 3 parameters, is it accepting? No. It is returning compiled error. Expected 2 arguments, but got 3. So this is the compiled error. This is a TypeScript is returning the compiled error. And suppose, can I pass one single parameter as a console.log? I'm just passing add numbers of one single pass I'm passing. No, because as per the declaration, it should accept 2 numbers and we should also pass 2 numbers. Even 1 number is also not allowed. So what is the compilation problem here? Expected 2 arguments, but got 1. So this is also a compilation error. So if I look at this particular function, we can pass only 2 parameters. We cannot pass more than 2 or less than 2. Okay. But in case of rest parameters, we can pass n number of parameters. Possibility is there. So the same function I will create once again, but that function will accept 1 parameter, 2 parameters, 3, 4, 5, n number of parameters we can pass. And that is called rest parameters. So there is no limit for the parameters, which is called rest parameters. Okay. So especially TypeScript, we have this concept. So rest parameters don't restrict the number of values that can pass to the function. Okay. The rest parameters don't restrict the number of values that can pass to the function. Okay. Now we'll see how we can create a function with rest parameters. Same functionality, same method, function, and same name I'm giving again. So let me copy the same function, add numbers. But here, if I look at this, we should not specify the parameters like this. So instead of that, so here we are passing n number of parameters. So multiple parameters. There is no limit, but we should accept all parameters. How many number of parameters I'm passing at the time of calling the function? All the parameters I should accept here. So we need to follow a special syntax here. That is 3 dots and variable name. Let's say nums. I'm just giving some variable name called nums. And what is the type of this variable? So previously, if I accept 1 parameter, variable name colon, data type is specified. But here, the variable name and what could be the data type of this? It is also number. I'm passing all number but multiple numbers we are passing. So multiple numbers, when I say, it should comes under array concept. So what is an array? Array is nothing but which can hold different sets of data or multiple sets of data. So if it is a normal primitive variable which can hold single value at a time, but array variable can store multiple values. So here we need to define array like this. Okay, so nums is basically a variable name, and colon number is a data type, and I want to make this numbers as a nums as a array variable. So I need to simply say single bracket. This is called array variable. Okay, now this particular parameter will able to accept n number of parameters, n number of values. We can pass one value, two values, 3, 4, 5, n number of values you can pass. Okay, and it won't accept any data type. Here we say number specifically, right? So we have to specify only number. We have to pass only number. But if you say any data type, then it can accept any kind of data, all kinds of data it is accepted. Okay, so as of now, I'm just accepting only number type of data and return the number. So how we can write the body now? So here we are taking different values. If you are getting two values, we need to add two numbers. If you are getting three values, then you have to add three numbers. If you are getting 5 values, 10 values, then you have to add 10 numbers. So here we need to implement a simple logic. Simple logic we will implement. So I'm writing a simple logic. In the next class, I will discuss about arrays concept. Then you will understand more about arrays. But for now, just understand at very high level, because this concept is needed for REST parameters concept. So here I'm writing simple logic. So what this logic will do actually? So this particular logic, this particular for loop will read all the values from this number, whatever values we are passing, each and every value will be captured and add that to the sum. Initially sum is what? 0. And as soon as you get this number, first number, second, third, fourth, how many values are passing here? All the values will be added to the sum. And once this for loop is completed, the sum variable contains the total of all the numbers. Let's say if I pass 1, 2, 3, it will calculate 1 plus 2 plus 3 like that. So this simple logic will calculate the sum of all the numbers which we have provided to this function. Okay, and don't focus more on this. In the next class, I will discuss about arrays concept, and just understand at very high level, this logic will calculate the sum of the numbers which we have passed into this array variable. Okay, this is called REST parameters, which is called as a REST parameter. There is no limit for that. So REST parameters don't restrict the number of values that you can pass to the function. Okay, now, so how to call the function? So the return type is, here I have specified some return type. So is it required to specify the return type? Is it required here? No, because we are just printing the output directly here. So return type is not needed. So you can simply remove this. Okay, now this is the function. So function, add numbers, 3 dots, nums is a variable, number is a type, and single bracket. And even colon is also not required because we are not specifying the type. If I specify the type, colon is needed. If I don't specify the return type, colon is also not needed. Okay, so this is the function, how we can create named function with REST parameters. Okay, so then how to call the function? Add numbers. So it is not returning anything, so we no need to put this in again one more console.log. Simply we can call. So now I'm passing two numbers. Just observe 1 plus 2. Will it work? 1 comma 2. I'm just passing 1 comma 2. So what is an output we will get? 3. So sum of the numbers is 3. So here we are printing actually. In the function itself, we are printing the output. Okay, so this time I will pass 3 numbers, 1 comma 2 comma 3. Then sum of the number 6. 1 plus 2 plus 3, 6. Similarly, I'll pass some more numbers. Let's say, so 10 comma 20 comma 30 comma 40 comma 50. So 5 parameters I'm passing. So this will work. Add 5 numbers and it is giving 150 as an output. Okay, so this is called REST parameters. Means there is no limit for the parameters. We can pass n number of parameters, but Remember, whatever the type we specified here, the same type of parameters we need to pass. The data type we should not change. Okay. So this is the third one. So named function with REST parameters. Next one. We understood the REST parameters. So everybody's clear? REST parameters. Or do you want me to show one more example? So named function with REST parameters. Okay, suppose I want to pass two different data types. For example, here I'm passing the data. All are numbers only. Here both are numbers. Here all three are numbers. Again, here all of them are numbers. But sometimes if you want to pass numbers and strings also, string or number, two different types, then how we can create a named function. So let me show you another example. So if you want to pass a different values, let's say example 4. So named function with REST parameters. This is also same named function with REST parameters, but multiple values, multiple types. So in the previous example, we have seen the same type parameters. All parameters are the same type. But this time I'm going to show you parameters with the different types or multiple types. Okay. So let me create a function, simple function, and I'll give some name, find elements. This is the name of the function. Okay, simple. I'm giving some name. The name is user defined. You can give whatever name you want. Find elements. And in this, 3 dots. So whenever you want to accept multiple parameters, 3 dots. And the variable name is, I'll say elements. And this is basically what array variable. So we need to specify the data type. So what is the data type here? So this time I want to accept a number and string both. So we have a special operator here. What it is? We can also use any, no problem, but that won't prefer most of the times. Suppose I want to pass only string or number, then how we can specify that? We have a special type here in types union. Yes, perfect. So in the bracket, we specify either number or a string. We have a union type, right? And obviously this should be array. So bracket is mandatory. So how we have defined this? 3 dots. Elements is a variable name, colon. And what could be the type of the variable? It can be number or it can be string. We can pass anything. And it should be array variable because it is holding multiple values. And also we'll define the return type also. Let's say number is a return type. So number is a return type. Okay. So I'll do a special type of operation here inside the function. Okay. Return type is number. Okay. Now what I want to do is I'll write a simple operation here. So whatever the numbers, whatever values we are getting inside this variable, I want to just find out how many values we are passing. Simple. So here this will return the multiple values. This will capture the multiple values which we are going to pass at the time of calling the function. We will call the function. How to call the function? Let's say find elements of. Okay. And this time I just want to pass a different parameters, like say 3, which is a number, John, which is a string, again one more number, again one more number, and again string. Only number and string we can pass randomly. You can arrange these values randomly. Order is not important. But the data should be data type, the values should be either number or should be string. So this is the way we need to call the function. Okay, this is the way we need to call the function. So now, yeah, you cannot pass the boolean here because we explicitly specify number and string, right? So we cannot pass boolean, null, or any other type. You can pass only number and string because explicitly we specify the data type. Okay. Now this is the way we need to call the function. So let us implement the function. So what is my logic here is whatever parameters I'm passing will be captured into this variable. Once it is captured, I want to find how many values I have passed. At the time of calling the function, how many values I have passed. How many values we have passed here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values have passed. That I want to count. So simple logic we have, that is whatever the variable we defined here, this is an array variable basically. When I use array variable, we have a keyword called length. This is called as a property also. And this will actually return the length of an array. Means what? How many values we have in this array. We can directly print this or we can return this. So anyway, we have specified the return type. So what I'll do is I will just return the value. Return elements dot length. Single statement I have returned. Okay. That's it. So what exactly this function will do? It will capture all the values into this variable. After that, it will find a length. How many values we have passed, that will be returned. Because it is returning, how we can print that value, return value, using console.log, like this. Okay, we no need to use any other variable. If you still want to store in another variable, you can define the variable. Okay. For example, let's say, let's execute this code and see what this will print. 5. So how many values we are passing here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values I'm passing. So accordingly, the function is calculated length. 5 is got returning. Okay, suppose I pass. Can you pass only numbers? Can we pass only numbers like this? So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. Can we pass numbers? Yes. Can we pass strings, only strings? Only strings. Yes, strings are allowed, right? So ABC, comma, XYZ. Strings also we can pass. Okay, now let us call the function, execute. Now you can see, first time how many values we passed? 5. Second time, 7 values we passed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the third time we passed only 2 values. And here we passed a combination of numbers and strings. Okay, so this returns 5 and this returns 7. This is returns 2. Okay, so this is how we can pass the data and we can return the value. So we can return the multiple arguments also. That is possible using arrays concept. Using array, the function also can return multiple values. Okay, so this is how we can simply use REST parameters. So we don't need to specify type for parameters while declaring the function. We specified actually. You can see elements is a variable, colon. What's the type of these elements? Can be a number or can be a string. So this is a type of the variable. Union type. In the first classes, I think second class, I've discussed about the union type. So now the elements comes under the number as well as string, both. So we can use this. This is called union operator. We specified the type actually. Okay, so can we get how many number and string we can take? You need to implement the logic for that. Okay, so here I have simply written to find the number of values. Okay, and again to find the number of how many are the numbers, how many are the strings, you can just implement some logic here. Okay, that is again programming concept come into picture. Okay, so this is the first one. So REST parameters, everybody's understood now what is REST parameters? What is REST parameters? Named function with REST parameters. We can pass n number of parameters. There is no limit for the parameters. In that case, if you don't know how many number of parameters you want, sometimes you may pass 2 parameters, sometimes you might pass 10 parameters. You don't know that number exactly. In that particular case, you can create named function with REST parameters. And same type you can pass or multiple types also you can pass using union operator or union type. Okay, so this is a named function. Now let me show you another example. Named function with REST parameters we have covered. The next one, named function with optional parameters. Named function with optional parameters. So what it is? Optional parameters. Okay, so in our previous function which we created here, let's say this is the function which we created. So how many parameters we are taking here? 2 parameters. So will it accept 1 parameter? No. 3 parameters? No. Compilation error. But what we can do is we can make a parameter optional. So if I create this function, I want to pass only one parameter, still it should accept. If I pass three parameters also, it should accept. So that not three parameters, at least if I say two parameters, we can make one parameter optional. Any one parameter is optional. That means even if you're not passing the value to that parameter, it still works. That's called optional parameter. So let me show you an example. Named function with optional parameters. Named function with optional parameters. Let me create a function. Function, and I'll give some name to the function called display. Let's say details. This is a function, name of the function. Now in this function, I will accept a different parameters. Let's say ID, which is a number, name, which is a string, and also mail ID. I will accept mail ID, and which is also string. Mail ID also string. And it doesn't return anything. So I'm simply say void. And after that, I'll try to implement the body. This is the function. So function, how many parameters it should accept? Three parameters. ID is a number, name is a string, mail ID is a string. Three parameters it should accept. Now let it be there. So now what I'll do is when I call the function, I'm just calling the function. Let's say display details. And how many values we need to pass? When you call the function, how many values we need to pass? Three values. Number, ID we need to pass, name we have to pass, mail ID also pass. So for example, I'm passing ID like this. And the name also I'm passing. Let's say Scott. And email ID also I'll pass, which is a string. So I say scott@gmail.com. So this is a valid. So it is accepting three parameters. ID, name, mail ID. So I'm just passing ID, name, email ID. So this will work fine, perfectly fine. Okay. Suppose if I don't want to pass email ID, will it accept the function? Will it accept if I don't pass email ID? It won't accept, right? It will throw compilation error. But still, even though if you're not passing this value, the method should simply display ID and name. If I pass email ID along with ID and name, the function should display ID, name, and email ID. But if I don't pass email ID, if I pass just email ID and name, then this function should display only the ID and the name. That's how we need to create this function. So in that particular case, we can make this mail ID is optional. We can make the mail ID is optional. Any variable, you can make it optional. So how we can make this variable optional? Okay, so before that, what I'll do, okay, let's make optional by passing question mark. This is a syntax. Okay, so any variable you can make it as an optional. So when I put question mark, then that particular variable becomes optional. Okay, now you tell me. So here what I'll do is I will just print the values of ID, name, and string. So what I'll say, I say console.log, and I will print ID, comma ID. And after that, I will print console.log name. And after that, I'll print console.log email, comma mail ID. Okay, just I printed those three values. So what this function will do, it will just print the values whichever we have passed. So if I don't specify the optional operator, so then how it will work? So when I call this function, obviously you will get all three values. You can see ID, name, email address. Okay, fine. Suppose if I don't pass email address, here I'm not passing email address, will it accept or not? Compile time error. So this won't accept. What it is saying, it is simply saying expected 3 arguments, but got only 2 arguments. The function is expecting 3 arguments, but we are passing only 2 arguments. It is not accepted. So in that particular case, what I can do is I can make mail IDs optional. Sometimes I can pass it or sometimes I may not pass. So I can make this mail ID optional. So what I can do, I can simply put question mark. So now there is no compile time error. Now when I execute this, Can you guess what is an output of the email? Because we are not passing email ID here, but I'm still trying to print email ID. So can you guess what is an output of this? Anyway, ID will be 123, name will be Scott, but what is the value you will get for email ID? You will get undefined, not null. Okay. So it is giving some error. See this? Okay, just a moment. Mail ID colon. Is it correct? Mail ID. Number. Okay. ID is a number. Name is a string. Okay. Mail ID. Question mark colon string. And the return type is void. And we are printing this ID, name, and mail ID. Okay. I'm not passing the second one. So let me execute one more time. Sorry. So day 7. Named function. Yeah, now we can see it is just returning undefined. It is returning undefined. Email ID is undefined. Why? Because we have not passed here. Will it work? The first one will work. First one. Yes. Because we are passing email ID. If you pass email ID, it will print email ID. If I don't pass email ID, it will just print undefined. Okay. Now I'll just slightly modify this code. So how we can modify? For example, when I pass email ID also along with ID and name, it should print email ID just like a previous output. But if I don't pass email ID, then I just print only ID and name. I just don't want to print this email ID. So like this, it is giving some undefined, right? I just want to avoid this. I just want to avoid this. So if I pass email ID, I should get ID name along with email ID. But if I don't pass email ID, then I should print only ID and name. I don't want to print even this also, undefined. So how we can modify this code? Put some condition. So before printing this email ID, just check whether it is undefined or not. So when we have to print mail ID, if it is not undefined, then we have to print email ID, right? If it is not undefined, then we have to print email ID. You understood my logic here? So when we have to print email ID, if it is undefined, we should not print. If it is not undefined, then I have to print. So let me put one if condition. If mail ID, right? So how we can put this condition? Not equal to. If mail ID is not equal to, undefined, then print the email ID. Otherwise not. Okay, now you observe this. I'm calling 2 times. So when I call the function first time, you can see it is printed 3 values because we are passing 3 values. Second time, it is just printed only ID and name. Why? Because we are not passing email ID. So obviously the email ID is undefined. So if mail ID is not equal to undefined, then only we will print it is. But it is undefined, we just ignore the statement. Okay, just very small logic I have applied here. So this is how we can also create optional parameters, a named function with optional parameters. Everybody's understood what is an optional parameter? The parameter which we can pass or you may not pass, optional. That's called optional parameters. We can make any variable optional if you want. Okay, clear everyone? So we are discussing named functions with the different options. So optional parameters. Now, let me show you another example. Named function with default parameters. Like we have an optional parameters. Similarly, we have also default parameters. Means what? We can assign some default value to the parameter. If you can assign some default value to the parameter, which is called default parameters. So the next example, named function with default parameters. So let me create a function. Function, let's say calculate discount, name of the method. So in this method, you can You can make any number of parameters optional, guys. There is no restriction. You can make all three parameters optional, or you can make only first parameter optional, or you can make another two parameters optional. There is no restriction like this. Just you put question mark in after the variable. That's it. So what is the use of question mark? We are making the variable, we are making the parameter is optional. To make the parameter optional, we put the question mark. That is a TypeScript syntax. If I don't put the question mark, then what will happen? If I don't put the question mark, what will happen? You must pass all three variable, all three values. It won't accept two parameters. Everybody's understood my point. So if I don't put question mark, you must pass three parameters. Since we have made this parameter optional, it is accepting two parameters here because mail ID is optional. We no need to pass mail ID here. That is called optional parameters. Okay. So now let us discuss about default parameters. So what is default parameters? We can assign some default value. So in this function, I will define a variable called price, and which is a number type, comma, rate. This is also number, and return type is void. And inside this, I just want to find out the discount, how much discount we have based on the price and rate. So I'll simply do some simple calculation. So what I'll do is I will calculate price into rate. Price into rate. Both are numbers. We can do multiplication, right? And this output I want to store in a variable. Let's create a variable. Let discount, which is also number, equal to. So this is simple expression I have written. So after that, I'm just trying to print the discount value. Say console.log of discount. Okay, so here I'm just writing a simple message. So discount amount like this. Okay, so this is a simple function which we created. So how many parameters it should take? Two parameters, price and rate. Both are the numbers. Return type is void. And after getting these two parameters, I'm just multiplying those two and calculating the discount. And then we are printing the discount. Now let us call the function. So to call the function, how many parameters we need to pass? How many parameters? Two parameters. Okay, now I'm just passing 1000 is a price, and I'm just giving some rate. Let's say rate is, let's say 0.30, a decimal number I'm giving. Okay, so now the 1000 will be assigned to the price and 0.30 will assign to the rate, and it will multiply and it will print the discount. Okay, so let me execute this code. Printed discount amount is what? 300. Perfectly, we get the output. Okay, now suppose if I don't pass this value, let's say I'll just pass only price, but I don't want to pass this rate here. Will it work? It will throw compilation error. What is a compile? Why it is a returning compilation error? Because it is expecting two parameters, but we are passing only one single parameter. Okay, so the 1000 will be treated as a price, first parameter, but we are not passing the rate here. So suppose if you don't pass any rate, then we can assign some default value to the rate. If I don't pass the rate here, we can assign some default value to that particular parameter. So how we can assign the default parameter? Simply rate colon number equal to 0.50. Some default value I'm assigning. This is called default parameter. So rate is a default parameter. I can assign some default value. So then when I pass only price, will it work or not? Yes. 1000 will be assigned to the price. And what is the rate value will be taken? By default, 0.50 will be taken. So when I execute this, you can see calculated the discount 500. Means what? 1000 into 0.50, it is calculated. So we got a 500, perfectly right. Okay, suppose again, if you go back to the previous call, will it work now? Will it work? Here we are passing 0.3, But here we define the default parameter value. 0.50 is the default value, but still we are passing the new value here. Will it work? Still it will work. But which value will be taken? 0.30 or 0.50? Which one will be taken? 0.30 will be taken, because we are explicitly passing the value here. If you are explicitly pass the value, this will be considered. If you don't pass this value, then the default value will be considered. Okay, so let me execute now. See, again we are getting 300. Why? Because it is taking 3.30. Okay, so again if I run both, see, the first call it is taken 300 because 3.30 is taking as a rate. And the second case, we are just passing only price. So default value 0.50 is taken. This is called default parameters. We can also assign some default value to the parameters. We can also pass a default value to the parameters. Understood, everyone? So simply we can assign the value to the variable like this. This is called default value. So a named function with default parameters. Okay, so how many types we have discussed so far in named function? So named function with no parameters and no return value. Named function with parameters and return value. Named function with rest parameters. Named function, again rest parameters with multiple types. Named function with optional parameters. Named function with the default parameters. How many types of parameters we discussed so far? Rest parameters, optional parameters, default parameters. Remember these three names, very important. In interview perspective, they will ask the question about this. What are the rest parameters? What are the optional parameters? What are the default parameters? Can you explain with an example? So you should be able to explain this. Okay, default parameters, optional parameters, rest parameters. Okay, so this is all about named functions. So what is named function? Named function should have a name. We have to create a function with some name. We have to explicitly specify the name of the function. Then only it becomes a named function. Okay, now let us move on to the another type of function, anonymous function. Anonymous function, which is also called as a nameless function, because we don't give any name to the function. Let's close this. I will create another file. Anonymous function. Anonymous functions.ts. Okay, so simple difference, guys. Named function, we have to explicitly specify the name to the function. In anonymous function, we don't specify any name to the function. Any name we don't specify, which is called anonymous function. Okay, so let us define this first. Anonymous function, which is also called as what? Unnamed function or nameless function. Anonymous function, which is also called as unnamed function or nameless function. Anonymous function is a function that doesn't have a name. Instead, it is assigned to a variable which acts as its name. What does that mean? See the syntax here. Function keyword. We have to use a function keyword, and we haven't specified any name here. Directly specify the parameters, and return type. If you have return type also, you can specify open bracket and then function body. This is the declaration part. We haven't specified any name, but the function we have to assign to a variable. We need to define some variable. Now this variable will act as a function name. This variable will be acting as a function name. So to invoke this function, we have to just call this variable. That's it. To invoke the function. Earlier in the named function, how we have done? So if you want to invoke the named function, we just call the function by specifying the name itself. But here, since we do not have name to the function, we have to store it in a variable. And when I invoke the function, just call this variable, simply like this. This is a calling function. Okay, this is a declaration. This is a calling the function. So anonymous function doesn't have any name to this. So how many functions, whatever the ways we have created in named functions, same thing we can do in case of anonymous functions also. Okay, so let's see the examples. Example 1. So at the end of the session, I will discuss what is the use of these functions and where we have to use named function, where we have to use anonymous. Again, we have a lambda functions, arrow functions. We will compare them. So example 1. So first understand the syntaxes and uses, then I will compare all three functions. Okay. So example 1, simple anonymous function I'm going to create. Anonymous function. It's very simple anonymous function I'm going to create. So function, keyword is again simple function, but we don't specify the name, directly specify the bracket. I'm not specifying any parameters also, but I'm returning something, string value I'll return. So return type is a string, and then return type is a string. Sorry, this is a single colon. Return type is a string, open bracket and closing bracket. Function, bracket, colon, return type is a string, and inside this I'll simply return something. Return hello TypeScript. I'm just returning some string value. This is the declaration part. So we haven't specified any name to the function. We haven't given any name to the function. Just write a function keyword, bracket, return type is optional. If you want to return some value, you can specify it, or else it is also optional. And inside this, I'm returning some message. Now, in anonymous function, since we do not have any name to this function, we have to store this entire function in a variable. We have to create a variable. So let MSG. I've just created a variable called MSG. Okay, and we don't need to specify any type to this message. Why? Because the function, whatever it is returning, that will be stored in MSG. So dynamically assign the type. So anonymous function, we have to declare in this way. The variable must be created. Without variable, this function we cannot invoke. Without the variable, we cannot invoke the anonymous function. Okay, now let us invoke the function. How to call the function? How to call the function? Simply when I say MSG bracket, that's it. This is how we need to call the function, simply by using name. So what we need to understand here is the variable name itself is acting as a function name. The variable name itself is acting as a function. So at the time of calling the function, we need to just call the variable. Since it is returning the value, we are just print that console.log. Okay, so we are not printing anything in this. So it is returning something. Return value we are printing using console.log. Now execute this code. So instead of named function, let me say anonymous function. Anonymous functions.ts. Yeah, now we got an output. Hello TypeScript. So this is a simple way we can create anonymous function without having name. Okay, so let me show you with parameters how we can create anonymous function with the parameters. Another example. Anonymous function with the parameters. Same thing. Function. Directly you specify the function without having name. Function, and I want to pass two parameters here. First parameter is a number. Second parameter is also a number. Also, I will specify the return type as a number. Return type is also number. And here I will simply return A star B, multiplication. A star B also will return number. So now we need to create a variable here. Let multiply. This is the variable name. So now we have stored this anonymous function into a variable. So how we can call this function now? Using variable. Simply say multiply. And how many parameters we need to pass? How many parameters we need to pass? Two parameters. 10, 20. Two parameters are passed. Since it is returning the value, I can put this in the console.log. Okay. Now let's go and execute. 200. 10 into 20, 200 we got an output. So this is how we can create an anonymous function with parameters. So again, in anonymous function also, Optional parameters are possible. REST parameters are possible. Default parameters also possible. So whatever we have done in the named function, all three kinds of parameters like optional parameters, default parameters, REST parameters also possible in anonymous function. The only difference is here we don't specify the name and we store this function in separate variable. That's a major difference. Other than this, rest of the things are exactly similar. Parameters wise, there is no difference between named function and anonymous function. How many parameters, what type of parameters we are passing in the named function? Same kind of a parameters in the same way we can pass in anonymous function also. There is no much difference with respect to parameters. Okay, so you guys can try them with anonymous functions. I can just leave it with you. And next we will move on to the third type of function, arrow functions. So these are the functions which we are going to use very frequently. Arrow functions will be preferred to use even in our TypeScript coding and even in our automation also. Most of the times we prefer to use arrow functions instead of creating normal functions. Okay, and we never use named functions and anonymous functions. Most of the times we go for arrow functions. Okay, arrow functions also comes under the anonymous function. Actually, the arrow functions or lambda functions are not a separate kind of functions. They also comes under the anonymous functions. Why? Because arrow functions doesn't have a name. And arrow functions also we can store into the variable. So whatever the attribute properties are there for anonymous function, for arrow functions also having same kind of a properties. There is no name and also variable is required. But what is a major difference is in arrow functions, we never use this function keyword. Instead, we use arrow marker. Instead, arrow marker. That's the only difference. Okay, so we'll see the arrow functions. Let me close this and create another file, which is called as arrow functions, which is also called as a lambda functions. Arrow functions or lambda functions. Arrow functions. .ts. So these are the functions most of the times we prefer to use. Arrow functions. So how to work with the arrow functions? Arrow functions is also called as lambda functions. Arrow functions are also called as a lambda functions. Let me write the definition here. So arrow functions are lambda functions. Lambda refers to anonymous functions in programming. Lambda functions are concise mechanism to represent anonymous function. So lambda functions is also exactly same as anonymous function. There is no much difference, but it will try to reduce the code. It's a simply concise mechanism to represent an anonymous function. Instead of function keyword, we just specify arrow mark. That's the only difference. And the functions are also called arrow functions. And while defining arrow functions or lambda function, we have three main important things. Parameters, the arrow, which is called as a fat arrow notation, which is also called as a goes to operator. Goes to operator. Equal to and greater than, which is called as a goes to operator. And statements represent the function instruction set. So these are the three parts which we have in the arrow function. Syntax. See here, have you used any function name? There is no function name. Are you using any function keyword? No function keyword. Directly you can put bracket, parameters are optional, arrow, and start writing the function. And the whole function we are storing into the variable. So this is also an anonymous function, but we still use arrow mark. This is the only difference. Other than this, same thing. Okay. And how to call this arrow function? Simply by calling the variable name. That's it. Okay. So let me show you a few examples of arrow function. First example, let me show you a simple arrow function with no parameters and no return value. Arrow function, no parameters and no return value. Just observe very carefully. Arrow function, I'm saying we should not use name of the function. We should not use function keyword. Directly we put bracket, colon, since it is not returning any value, void, and write the body directly. Here I'm just printing something, console.log of hello TypeScript. That's it. This is an arrow function, guys. Have you put any arrow here? No, right? So after keeping the return type, we need to put arrow like this. Now this becomes an arrow function. See the syntax, simple one single bracket. There is no name. There is no function keyword, colon, return type. After return time, you need to use this bracket. You need to use this arrow equal to greater than and start writing the block. This is a block. And finally, we have to store this function in a variable because it is also an anonymous function. So we need to create a variable. Let's say greet. Some variable name is required like this. This is how we can simply create an arrow function. No parameters, no return value. So no parameters, no return value. So how to invoke the function? Same, greet like this. So it is not returning any value since we don't need to put another console.log. It is just printing the message. Okay, so let's execute this code. Day 7 arrow functions.tx. Arrow functions.ts. Hello TypeScript. So we got this output. Okay, this is simple arrow function with no parameters, no return value. And we haven't used function keyword. We haven't used name of the function. Simply we directly specify the arrow mark, bracket, arrow mark and single statement. Store into the variable. Okay, let me show you a few more examples for arrow functions. Another example. So let's create another arrow function which will take parameters and also return a value. Arrow function with parameters and return value. Arrow function will take parameters and also return a value. Let's create an arrow function directly. So how to create directly? Bracket. Two parameters I want to pass. A, which is a number, comma B is also a number. And return type is also number. After that, arrow, open bracket and closing bracket. And inside this, I will return A plus B. I'll return A plus B. So this is the function. Now finally what we need to? We need to store this function in a variable. So where we need to define this variable? At the beginning. So you can say let add. Some variable I'm just giving, add. That's it. So this is an arrow function with parameters and return value. So how to invoke this function? Simply I can say add. That's it. And because it is returning the value, we need to put inside this console.log. Also, we need to pass a parameters. Console.log. And inside this, we need to keep this function. We need to pass two parameters, right? So I can say 10, 20 pass. So this is how we need to call arrow function. So let's go and execute. We got a 30 as an output. Okay. So arrow functions with parameters and return value. This is how we can create. So let me show you one more thing. When I create an arrow function, if we have only one single statement, one single return statement inside the block, you no need to write the curly braces. Curly braces are optional. Okay, remember this point. When you write your arrow function, if you have only one single return statement, you don't have anything inside the body, you have only one single return statement, then the curly braces are optional. Even return statement is also optional. Let me show you how it will be. So if we have a thing which is called implicit return, which is called as an implicit return. Let me show you this. Arrow function with implicit return. This is specific to arrow function functionality. Arrow function with implicit return. Arrow function with implicit return. Same method, same function. I'm recreating once again. Here we are returning A plus B. We are returning A plus B. Instead of that, let me return A star B. You can put anything because A plus B you written is A star B. Now, how many statements are there inside the body? Only one single statement, that is return statement. So in this particular case, you no need to keep this curly brace and you no need to use return statement. Simply you can put this here. That's it. One single statement, everything is over. Okay, so if you have a one single return statement, we can make it as an implicit return. Implicit is return is nothing but what? We no need to write a return statement separately, explicitly. So function, which is having parameters, return type, arrow, we simply avoid the curly braces since we used implicit return. Okay. So this is, let's say plus here, I've just put plus. And let me create another method also. Add and multiply. And here also we need to just only one single return statement as a star. So how to call those functions? Simply add 10 comma 20, multiply 10 comma 20. And both are returning the values. So we need to keep inside the console.log. Console dot. So this is called implicit return. Arrow function with implicit return. So implicit return is nothing but what? We no need to write a curly braces and we no need to write a return statement. Simply we can write an expression after arrow. That becomes the implicit weight. So now let us execute and see. Yeah, now first one, 10 plus 20, 30 is returned. Second, 10 into 2, 200 is got returned. Okay. So arrow function with implicit return. So when this syntax is applicable, only if you have a one single return statement. Only when I have a single return statement, this notation works. If you have a multiple statements inside the body, this statement won't work. You need to write a curly braces. We need to include them in the curly braces. Okay, this is called arrow function with implicit weight. Now, let me take another one. Optional parameters, rest parameters, default parameters, all those things are possible in arrow functions also. So let's see the examples. Okay. Next one. Arrow functions with optional parameters. Arrow function with optional parameters. We already know what is an optional parameter. The parameter is optional. Even though if you're not passed, still it will work. So what is an operator we have used for optional parameter? Question mark we have used. Same thing here also, it will continue. Same thing. Same question mark. So let me copy that function from the previous example. So go to the named function, optional function, where we have created optional parameters. So these are the rest parameters, multi-type, optional parameters, right? So let me take the same function. This is actually named function. We need to make it as an arrow function. Okay, so this is a named function. So let us see how we can make it as an arrow function. Arrow function should not have a function keyword. So remove that. Arrow function doesn't have a name also. Just remove the name also. ID, number, name, mail ID is an optional parameters. Return type is also void. So what else we need to add additionally? Bracket. So, sorry, arrow. That's it. So now it becomes arrow function. We make a named function into arrow function. And what additional thing we need to add here? What is an additional thing? We need to put the variable, right? So let you can give some name to this. Display details. Okay, some name is required. That's it. So how to invoke the function? Just by passing the parameters like this. So first time I'm passing email ID. So it will print email ID also along with ID and name. Second time I'm just passing only ID and name. So the email ID is a optional. Email ID will not be printed. So execute the code and see. Perfectly working. So first call, 3 parameters I passed. So ID, name, email is got printed. Second time ID name is passed. So only both are printed. ID and name is got printed. Okay. So this is how we can simply make it an arrow function. So there is no name, nothing. Simply bracket parameters and make the parameter as an optional. Whenever you put the question mark, that variable becomes a optional. Okay, optional parameters. Now let us see the default parameters. So whatever we have achieved with the named function, same thing we can achieve with the arrow functions also. Next example. Arrow function with the default parameters. Arrow function with the default parameters. Again, let's take the previous one. Named functions, default parameters. So we have created this function. Let's copy this. Arrow function with the default parameters. Yeah, now tell me how to make this arrow function. Remove the function keyword. Keyword should not be there. Even name of the also should not be there. We can make this name as a variable. So how we can make this variable? We can make this variable as a variable. Okay, let calculate discount equal to, and directly bracket, return type is void, and should remove the curly braces should be there. And what additional thing we need to add here? Arrow we need to add. Okay, that's it. So now this is an arrow function. And what's the default value here is 0.50 is a default parameter. We have assigned some default value. So in the first call, I'm passing 0.30, so which is replaced with the 0.50. But in the case of only when I pass single value 1000, then it will be applicable because we are not passing rate here. So the default value will be applicable and do the calculation. So let's go and execute now. Perfect. So first time 300, second time 500. Okay, this is how we can also write arrow function with the default parameters. And what else we have? Optional parameters, default parameters. We also have a REST parameters. REST parameters means what? We can pass n number of parameters. There is no limit. There is no limit. We'll see that. Arrow function with REST parameters. So let us get the function. Default, optional, and you can say multiple types also you can specify. Same type is also we can specify. So let me take this example. Multiple types. Yes. So in case of optional parameters, okay, let me go here. So in case of optional parameter, it gives an error when we use it for first parameters. Yes, if I don't pass the first parameter or second parameter, it will give compile time error because we haven't made them optional, right? So we haven't made the first two parameters optional. So we have to pass the values. Only we make the third variable is optional. That's the reason. Even though if you don't pass the third value, it will still accept. Understood my point? If you don't want to get an error, you can also make the first two as optional by just putting the question mark. In that case, you won't get any error. But if I don't specify optional, but still, if I don't pass any value, then you will get into compile time error. Understood my point? Okay, so whichever variable is making as optional, only that particular value we can ignore to pass at the time of calling the function. But rest of the values you must pass. Why? Because we haven't made them as optional. They are mandatory. Okay. All right. So now let us move on to the REST parameter. So what is the REST parameters means? N number of parameters we can pass. So now we need to make this as an arrow function. How we can make it? Let's make this find, remove the function keyword. And let's make this find elements is a variable name equal to. Now this is the function, arrow function. And 3 dots should be there. Elements is a variable name. Number, it can be number or string, whatever. And it is an array type of variable. And return type is what? Number. After that, arrow. After that, arrow. So this is arrow function. So we can call this multiple times. Find elements. And first time I'm passing 5 values. Second time passing 7 values. Third time I'm passing again 2 values. So the function will just find out the length of an array. How many values are there in the first array, second, and third. Okay. So this is how we can also use arrow functions along with the REST parameters. Okay. So it seems there is a hard constraint in TypeScript that you can't have first parameters and optional. You can make any parameters an optional. You can make any parameters an optional. Let me check once again. Example 5. This is an example 6. arrow function with rest parameters. Arrow functions with rest parameters. So let me just comment this. So optional parameters, you can make any parameters optional. There is no restrictions. Okay, let's go back to the optional parameters. So this is the one. Okay, so for example, let's say I want to make ID as an optional. How we can make it? Question mark. And now you can see name is giving an error. Name is a required parameter cannot follow an optional parameter. A required parameter cannot follow optional parameters. What does that mean? So we can make this as also optional. So remember carefully, this is one restriction here. When you make first parameter is optional, followed by the next parameter, whatever is there, that should also be optional. Okay, that should also be optional. If I don't put this optional, this will throw an error, compile time error. Okay, so next parameter should be optional. So this is one restriction which we have when you create an optional parameters. Remember this. When you make only the first parameter, suppose again, if I make this parameter, second parameter is optional, third parameter I'm removing. Again, it's giving an error. Why? Because once you make the first parameters are optional, second parameter also followed by the next parameter, whatever passing, that is also should be optional. Okay, this is one constraint which we have. Okay, and one more thing, we make the third parameters are optional, but after the third parameter, we don't have any other parameter. So it is not giving any compile time error. So we can simply make the third parameter optional. Okay, this is one restriction which we have in TypeScript. Understood everyone? So this is the only one constraint. So if we make first parameter is optional, the second parameter must be also optional. If the second parameter is optional, third parameter also should be optional. Like that. Okay. So that's all for functions in TypeScript. Anonymous functions. First, we have discussed about named functions, then anonymous function, arrow functions. Arrow functions are not a separate kind of functions. That is also comes under anonymous functions, but some additional thing, like we can just concise the code or we can try to reduce the code. And which is also called as a lambda functions. In the recent latest versions of JavaScript and TypeScript, the arrow functions are introduced or lambda functions are introduced. So that is the reason we can simply prefer to use arrow functions directly instead of using named functions or anonymous function. Okay, so callback is nothing but what? A function will call again the same function, which is basically called as a callback function. Okay, a function which will able to call the same function, which is also called as what? Recursive function. So normally in the programming concept, you can see such type of functions. If there is any requirement, same function we can call in another function multiple times. Okay. So why we are not specifying let in parameter function? Let in the parameter function. So in parameters, let is not needed. Okay, in the parameters here, let is optional. We just specify because we are receiving the data here. So here let is optional. Let we don't need. Then I put the let, it will give an error. Okay, arguments don't need let. We just need only data type. So according to the syntax, which we need to follow like this. According to the syntax, we need to follow. Okay. So in the coming sessions, we will discuss more examples. And functions concept is very important. Again, once we discuss arrays concept also, we will include the functions concept. And function can also return multiple values. And we have a different type of functions. Again, based on the requirement, we can create recursive functions, callback functions, and so on. We will see that in the coming sessions. Okay. So for now, this is enough. So I just shared this document. You guys can go through this. I've given the named function, example, syntaxes, and everything. 3 types of functions and comparison also we have given. And most preferable function is what? Arrow functions. Named functions and anonymous functions is the old one actually. In the previous old versions, they have introduced initially And in the recent versions of JavaScript and TypeScript, arrow functions are introduced. So we can directly go with the arrow functions because the syntax will be very short. Okay, so based on this topic, I will give a quiz for today's session. You guys can go through with this based on only functions concept. And this quiz contains almost 15 questions. And at the end, I have given answers also. And first do practice and practice all the examples. And once you have understood the concept and practice the example, then come to this quiz and attempt it. Okay, there are all multiple choice questions. And try to complete this for today's session. And tomorrow's session, we will continue with the rest of the concepts. Okay. Yeah.